Part 19. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gongzi. Chapter 181. The Spring is Quiet. In the small courtyard of the Song family, Su Danking stood in the corner, looking at the woman in palace clothes under the eaves, with helplessness on her face. People in Jianghu respect Su Danking as the sage of painting, and Suan Hibikui is his masterpiece. A man has a good reputation, so does a woman. To be able to overwhelm a generation with her stunning appearance, and to leave a name for generations like Zizi, I am afraid not many women can resist this temptation. However, there are only 8 people in Suanhe and Bikui, but there are countless women in the world. Among them are many who have conquered the country, have extraordinary talents, and even have a transcendent status and have magical martial arts skills. Seeing how unfair Su Danking is, there are always some beauties who feel dissatisfied. And if this base expands to the entire world, you can imagine how many people are looking for trouble. Su Danking's original intention was indeed just to paint all the beauties in the world and become a libertine. But after the first beauty was painted and her reputation spread all over the world, her nature changed. There are so many beauties in the world, how can she paint them all? Moreover, those beauties who are half as good in appearance, strong in martial arts, and have scary backgrounds cannot be dismissed as ugly. Painting, Su Danking could only fend off the women who came to him in the name of buying wine, and then ran away. A woman who has been tricked will naturally not bypass Su Danking, just like Zhongli Chuchu's master, who is still chasing Su Danking to this day. Moreover, after discovering the power of Su Danking's pen, all the prominent families in the world would inevitably try to push their daughters into the position of beauties so that they could gain more leverage in future marriages. Under such circumstances, Su Danking is a wandering knight. No matter how good his martial arts skills are, there are some people who simply cannot afford to offend him. If he can finish the painting of Ba Kuei and retire alive, to be honest, he is gone. Great luck. Now the emperor has given a golden pen, allowing Su Danking to paint the beauties of the Zhaohong period again. To the emperor, it might be just an understatement, but to Su Danking, it was really fatal. When he walked down Zhongnan Mountain, Su Danking knew that he might not be able to finish his journey, but he never expected that he would be blocked before he even went out, and it seemed that the situation today was not good. Su Danking held a black oil paper umbrella in front of him and looked at the 4 Xiao family disciples in front of him with an expression that was hard to describe. The Queen Mother was also the 8th leader of Suanhe. Su Danking must have known her and still remembered her. When he heard that there was a great beauty in Huainan, he rode over there with a paintbrush to see if she could catch her eye. Unexpectedly, just after entering Huainan, before finding the Xiao family's gate, a black sack was placed on his head, and then he arrived in the Xiao family's garden. At that time, in the colorful garden, a young girl with a face full of auras stood in the garden holding a round fan pretending to be mature, and raised her hands to hold the flower branches as if to admire them. A dozen or so gangsters or immortals, all powerful figures in the world, were standing around, and they were ready to cut him into pieces at the command of the young lady. Su Danking considers himself a scholar and has character. He feels that people who cannot paint will definitely not paint. The little girl at that time was indeed very tall, but she was too young, and most importantly, her character was too unruly. A beauty should be beautiful from the inside out, and her appearance, character, and temperament are all indispensable. Only then can she be called the most beautiful woman in the country. Unruly and willful women obviously cannot do that. Su Danking said at that time, "I won't paint." The lively and cute little girl kept saying nice things for a long time. If she didn't agree, she just raised her hand and a dozen people gathered around and gave her a beating. The character of a literati is also limited. Su Danking had no choice but to grit his teeth and draw one. Now that he was blocked by the Queen Mother again, Su Danking knew that he could not escape today. After struggling for a long time, he still raised his hand and saluted. Your Majesty, please don't embarrass the common people. Your Majesty gave the golden pen to the common people to draw the 8 great leaders of Zhaohong. Mrs. Lu. The Queen Mother's almond-shaped eyes widened slightly, interrupting Su Danking's words. What? Hongluan can't be called a beauty. Su Danking bowed and shook his head, and said seriously, of course not, I deserve it. Well, according to convention, Xian and Ba Kui are both women who have not yet reached the hairpin level. The Queen Mother frowned slightly. Do you think Hongluan is old? Hearing this, before Su Danking could react, Mrs. Lu became unhappy and quietly pinched the Queen Mother's waist. Su Danking smiled, shook his head and said, reputation is not always a good thing. If the common people painted Mrs. Lu today, the public would definitely think that the Xiao and Lu families were using their power to suppress others, which would damage the reputation of the lady. What the common people are doing is Mrs. Lu thinks about it, not because she doesn't want to paint. In fact, to put it bluntly, Su Danking was afraid of painting Mrs. Lu. All the women in Chang'an City who were married or over the age of hairpins came here. You may not be able to afford it, and you definitely can't open this hole. Mrs. Lu also didn't want the reputation of Zhaohong Bagui. After all, she was already married, so getting a reputation would be harmful but useless. She just wanted a portrait to give to Su Buling. At this time he said softly, Mr. Su, don't worry, you can just draw a portrait and it won't be counted among the Bakui. Su Danking didn't believe the woman's words at all. As long as he painted today, with so many escorts and maids present, the news would definitely get out, and it would cause an uproar tomorrow. What about Su Danking comes out again, Zheahong's most beautiful surname is Lu, Hongluan, and so on. This is not at all, it's beyond human control. Madam, there are rules in the world, so don't make things difficult for ordinary people. Mrs. Lu pursed her lips. Seeing that Su Danking was stubborn and refused to draw her, she felt helpless and a little disappointed. She could only look at the shield she had found. The Queen Mother was gloating in her heart, but she couldn't show it on her face. She just snorted lightly. If you don't accept my toast, you will be punished. She raised her hand after she finished speaking, and the 4 ferocious guards rolled up their sleeves and stepped forward to beat Su Danking violently. Su Danking had been beaten a lot in the past, and if he fought back now, he would get into big trouble. He could only act stubborn and let the Queen Mother and Madame Lu beat him up to calm down. Madame Lu felt a little embarrassed after seeing this, and raised her hand to stop it, but she didn't expect a conversation to suddenly come from outside the courtyard wall. Mr. Su. The voice was like spring water in March, gentle and mature, with a bit of surprise. Madame Lu and the Queen Mother frowned at the same time and tilted their heads to look at the courtyard wall. Dao Bai, Master Ning, why are you here too? He, I'm an old acquaintance of Su Danking. I just went to Master Song's place and sat for a while. I heard that Su Danking lived here, so I came to see him. You brought so many people, but there are distinguished guests in the yard. Yes, I'll take Master Ning in. We should all know each other. Hearing this conversation, Su Danking felt relieved, knowing that he wouldn't have to take the beating today. After all, women never use violence in front of women of equal strength. And the Queen Mother and Madame Lu, after hearing Master Ning and an old acquaintance of Su Danking, both understood who was here. The Queen Mother, the most beautiful woman in the world. Madame Lu, I know Ling Er. Humph. Both of them showed some hostility in their eyes. Seeking monthly votes and recommendation votes, there are still 2 chapters to be written. I will post them during the day if I finish them, and tomorrow if I can't finish them. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 182. Earlier, Ning Yuhe visited friends in Chang'an City, and first went to the Imperial College. As the face of the Tang family and a woman with outstanding martial arts skills, Ning Yuhi actually knew a lot of friends. Later, after the incident of escaping from marriage came out, she was endlessly hunted by the Tang family, and she was already in Zhongnan Mountain. After Su Danking, who had sealed the pen, learned about it, he wrote a letter to Song Baking, who was serving as the sacrificial wine in the Imperial College, so that he could ask for a favor from the emperor and find a stable place to live outside the world. Now that I have come to Chang'an, a visit is inevitable. After hearing that Su Danking was also in Chang'an, Ning Yuhi went directly to Zuji Street. The emperor pardoned her with an edict, changed her name and joined the Changqing Temple, and she was no longer involved with the former Miss Tang. Her current identity was very clean, and she could still walk around normally, but she definitely couldn't show up in public. Ning Yuhi was still wearing a wide robe and a curtain hat on his head. He walked slowly to the depths of the alley. When he looked up, he saw many official guards standing near the small courtyard. Ning Yuhi had just made trouble for Zhang Xiang a few days ago. To avoid causing trouble, Ning Yuhi turned around and was about to leave. However, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a young man in white robes being captured by two charming men outside the low courtyard wall. The woman was caught in the middle, looking into the yard. Ning Yuhi frowned slightly, thinking he was some wanton dandy, but after looking carefully, he felt that the figure from behind looked familiar. Wasn't this the prince who saved her a few days ago? Ning Yuhi was stunned, with a bit of joy in his eyes, because Su Danking and Princess Su were old acquaintances, and they had no enmity with each other, so there was no need to deliberately hide it, so he walked slowly up to him and raised his hand to salute. Master Su. Su Buling was watching Aunt Lu and the Queen Mother bullying others when he suddenly heard a gentle and mature voice behind him. He turned his head with some doubts. A Taoist nun was standing upright in the alley, wearing a white curtain covering her cheeks and shoulders. But it was difficult to cover up the bulging figure under the Taoist robe. Su Buling just glanced at the outline, and some pictures flashed in his mind. Not a blade of grass grows, the steamed buns are big. Cough dash. Su Buling's expression changed slightly, and he hurriedly swept away the messy thoughts in his mind, with pure eyes and a smile. Bidao, Taoist Master Ning, why are you here too? Ning Yu's face looked a little confused under her hat. She didn't understand why Prince Su always called her Taoist priest Bai. Her surname was not Bai, so she could be called Taoist priest Tang. After thinking about it for a while, Ning Yuhi just thought it was Su Buling's preconceived slip of the tongue, nodded slightly and chuckled, haha, Pandao and Su Danking are old acquaintances. I just went to sit with Master Song for a while and heard that Su Danking lived there. Here, come and take a look, there are so many people here, but there are distinguished guests in the courtyard. Su Buling looked back. Su Danking was too stubborn. He was about to go in, when he raised his hand. Yes, I'll take Taoist Master Ning in. We should all know him. Ning Yuhi nodded lightly and followed Su Buling into the courtyard gate. He looked up and saw the Queen Mother and Mrs. Lu in red palace clothes under the eaves. Su Danking was cornered by 4 guards with a look of despair on his face. Ning Yuhi didn't know the Queen Mother, but she was preparing to enter the palace to become a queen. She knew the etiquette and dress of the palace. Looking at her appearance, she naturally guessed her identity. She quickly stepped forward and bowed. Ning Yuhi, a poor man, has met the Queen Mother. Under the eaves, the Queen Mother's eyes were fixed on Ning Yuhi in the courtyard. She looked from head to toes, and then from feet to head. Her originally slightly lazy sitting posture became a little straighter. She subconsciously raised her chest and raised her head, and her expression changed. Dignified and majestic, unsmiling. Mrs. Lu's eyes wandered back and forth between Su Buling and Ning Yuhi. Her expressions did not move. Thousands of possibilities flashed through her heart, which gradually turned into suspicion in her eyes. The Queen Mother had no intention of looking at Mrs. Lu's sour expression and looked at Ning Yuhi. I have admired Taoist Ning for a long time, but this is the first time I have seen him. I took my hat and came over to sit down. Thank you, Queen Mother. After all, Ning Yuhi was born into a wealthy family, so he was not very restrained. He took off his curtain hat and walked under the eaves, sitting next to the Queen Mother. At this moment, except for Su Danking and Su Buling, almost all the other men and women inside and outside the courtyard were looking at Ning Yuhi's appearance, either explicitly or covertly. The Empress Dowager's beauty is naturally a bit unique, while Mrs. Lu's is dignified, gentle, and fragrant like a peony. But Ning Yuhi is completely different. At first glance, there is nothing surprising about the coldness and clearness. But after watching it for a long time, it feels just right. Not too much, not too little, not too dark, not too light. The slightest change is not suitable. It is difficult to imagine it being more beautiful than it is now. The right look. The idea of guarding the retainers was not shown because of his profound skills. The palace maids were full of envy, looking left and right, obviously comparing themselves to the three charming beauties under the eaves. Mrs. Lu and the Queen Mother both said, "That's it, the look in his eyes." Well, the beauty looks at each other. Ning Yuhi was a monk, and he no longer cared about these worldly customs. He just sat on the chair calmly and nodded to Su Danking in the distance. Seeing that Mrs. Lu was thinking wrong again, Su Buling hurriedly stepped forward and walked under the eaves, showing a bright smile. "Aunt Lu, Queen Mother, Taoist Ning met me again when he came to Beijing a few days ago. I didn't expect that Taoist Ning would come here today. What a coincidence." Mrs. Lu's eyes were full of suspicion, and she looked Su Buling up and down. She wanted to get closer and smell it, but she felt that the occasion was not right, so she could only say softly, "Ling when did you come here?" Taoist Ning has been practicing in Changqing Temple for many years and has not appeared for many years. How come he met you as soon as he came here, and came with you? The words were all about, are you related to the world's #1 foxy woman? Su Buling smiled helplessly, moved closer, and asked, "I came to visit Mr. Su, why is Aunt Lu here too?" Mrs. Lu was stunned, and suddenly reacted, thinking that it was not good. "Why am I here? I asked the Queen Mother to come and force Su Danking to paint." Thinking of this, Mrs. Lu blushed slightly, coughed lightly, turned her head, and said casually, "Well, the Queen Mother was bored in the palace, I accompanied her out for a walk, and happened to hear that Mr. Su came to Chang'an, so we came to see." The Queen Mother was still looking at Ning Yuhi, and snorted lightly. "Your aunt wanted Su Danking's painting and forced me to come here. I am not so unreasonable." You. Being blocked from the stage, Mrs. Lu was immediately anxious. Su Buling quickly inserted between the two and said with a smile, "Forget it, Mr. Su abides by the rules, so it doesn't matter if he can't paint. Linger will go back and paint a picture for Aunt Lu, and I guarantee that you will be satisfied." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 183. After some good words and persuasion, Mrs. Lu's anger and frustration finally subsided a bit, and she raised her eyes and glanced at Su Buling. "Okay, I don't care about a painting, you have to keep your word, but don't paint it elsewhere." Su Buling nodded repeatedly and thought for a while. "Taoist Master Ning came to visit Mr. Su, and we wanted to catch up on old times. How about your son sending the Queen Mother back to the palace?" Firstly, he wanted to be alone with the Queen Mother, and secondly, he wanted to prevent the three women who were not convinced from each other from causing trouble later. Ning Yuhi actually didn't want to interact with the Queen Mother and Mrs. Lu. He came here to thank Su Danking. When he heard that Su Buling came to her rescue, He naturally showed a grateful smile and nodded to Su Buling. But what Ning Yuhi didn't expect was that her instinctive closeness to her savior would cause Su Buling a big disaster. Mrs. Lu was very observant, and she could see from this look that the relationship between the two was by no means as simple as a chance meeting. Think of Ning Yuhi's reputation as the most beautiful woman in the world, and then think of Su Buling's unparalleled appearance. Talented and beautiful. Is it possible? The person named Ning is already so old, many years older than your child. How can this work? Mrs. Lu's mind was spinning all over for a moment. After thinking about it for a moment, she smiled and said, "Your Majesty, don't be in a hurry. We finally met Taoist Ning once. It's a pity not to talk more. I heard that Taoist Ning not only ranked first among the 8 chiefs of Suan He, but was also famous for his swordsmanship. Linger has been fond of martial arts since he was a child. Ning, if Taoist master is free, he can teach his son Tang Jiajian, he has always been interested. In the world of martial arts, the master of one move is also the master, and the Tang family's sword is a family-heard secret that cannot be passed on to others. Before teaching Kung Fu, one must become a master. The status of master and apprentice is the same as that of father, son, and mother, which is an absolute taboo." Mrs. Lu said this just to see Ning Yuhi's reaction and whether there would be any clues. She had no intention of actually asking Su Buling to become a disciple. But Mrs. Lu forgot that there was a queen mother next to her. The queen mother also felt that there was something strange between Su Buling and Ning Yuhi. Considering that Su Buling dared to touch even her, it was not impossible that he was interested in Ning Yuhi. But what Ning Yuhi fled was the emperor's marriage. Even if he was pardoned, there was no reason to marry again. Otherwise, if there was news that even the emperor doesn't like him, he only likes so-and-so, where would the emperor's face be? If this so-and-so is Su Buling, the already cracked relationship between the imperial court and Prince Su will probably get even worse. Therefore, after hearing Mrs. Lu's words, the queen mother had a thought in her mind and nodded. That's right. There have long been rumors that Ning Dao has great attainments in swordsmanship. He can be regarded as your elder. It's quite suitable to be the master who teaches martial arts. How about we make it that way? Ning Yuhi had seen Su Buling's skills that night, and he cherished his talent very much. He had not yet repaid the favor of saving his life, so he had no objection to teaching Su Buling his martial arts skills. He nodded lightly. If the prince doesn't dislike it, Pandeo would be willing to teach him swordsmanship. In just one sentence, Su Buling was not given a chance to interrupt. 3 completely different eyes were locked on Su Buling. Mrs. Lu was full of suspicion and wanted to hear Su Buling's answer. The queen mother's gaze could not be refused, and she wanted to strangle the signs in the cradle. Ning Yuhi showed some appreciation and generosity, looking like he was willing to give everything he had to others. Su Buling blinked, and some more pictures flashed through his mind. Pink, Master Baiwentu, I'm afraid this is not good. Su Buling squinted his eyes slightly and hesitated, then the expressions of Mrs. Lu and the Queen Mother darkened, obviously thinking that he had other ideas. Su Buling was not an indecisive person. Anyway, it was not him who suffered the loss. He did not hesitate at the moment, smiled softly, raised his hand and bowed in a curt manner. I have heard about the Tang family sword since I was a child, but I have never been able to learn it. If Taoist Ning is willing to teach me, then maybe I can call him master here. When Ning Yuhi saw that Su Buling was really willing to worship her as his teacher, his expression became a little more solemn. In the world of martial arts, master once, master for life is not just a simple title, it is a lifelong event. Well, it's too hasty to do the apprenticeship here. In a few days, Pandeo will prepare the apprenticeship ceremony. It won't be too late for the prince to call him master. Ning Yuhi stood up and raised his hand to support Su Buling, indicating that Su Buling did not need to salute. Su Buring naturally had no objection. He nodded with a smile and stepped aside again. The atmosphere under the eaves finally calmed down again. In the following time, Su Buling basically didn't interfere with the three beauties and stood quietly under the eaves listening to the gossip. Ning Yuhi's words were friendly, but because he didn't have much contact with the Queen Mother and Mrs. Lu, there was nothing to talk about. The Queen Mother has been in the Deep Palace for a long time, and she is very good at having someone to chat with. You come and I reminisce about the past, basically recalling all the trivial things from that year, until it was too late at dusk. Then they stood up and said goodbye to each other. Mrs. Lu inexplicably found a master for Su Buling. Naturally, she couldn't ignore him. As a guardian, she invited Ning Yuhi to visit the palace as a guest and get to know him on the way. Su Buling then volunteered to escort the Queen Mother back to the palace. After a large group of people left, the Song family courtyard finally became quiet. Painting Saint Su Danking, who had been left out for a long time, raised his sleeves and wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. He looked like he was surviving the disaster. He took an oil paper umbrella from the back room and wanted to escape. It's a pity that as soon as I opened the courtyard door, I saw a gentle girl standing at the door with an excited look on her face. Uncle Su, have you finished your painting? Show me quickly. Su Danking's expression froze, and then he remembered that he wanted to help Song Yufu paint Prince Su. But in the situation just now, with the Queen Mother present, he wanted to dig a hole and bury himself. How could he be in the mood to pay attention to what a man looked like? Yufu, Prince Su. Seeing Su Danking's hesitation, Song Yufu's face suddenly darkened. She lowered her head and murmured in a low voice. Is Uncle Su unwilling to paint? Alas, in fact, Uncle Su is only a few decades older. When he was young, he was no worse than Prince Su, but he is just older. Besides, we are not a daughter's family, so we shouldn't compare with each other. Su Danking took a deep breath, stroked his beard, smiled softly, and nodded. How can I, Su Danking, be jealous of a man's appearance? It's just that painting is like writing an article. It also requires the right time to write with spirit. Just now, I didn't pay attention just now. Song Yufu pursed her lips with disappointment in her eyes, and hesitated for a moment. Then I'll find an opportunity to call Prince Su over, but he's busy, and I don't know if he will come over next time. He. Su Danking sighed. Let's talk about it next time we come over. Just ask the prince not to take other people with him. Then he closed the door and returned to the yard. Song Yufu nodded and left the alley with satisfaction. Please give me monthly votes and recommendation votes. Currently, they are all ranked around 15. It would be nice to be in the top 10 if I don't have a big recommendation and get more exposure. Thank you. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 184. The carriage swayed, and the noise from the street echoed around. The Queen Mother sat alone by the car window and wondered, still thinking about Ning Yuhi. From time to time, she picked up the bronze mirror at hand and looked at it, as if she was making some comparisons. I don't know how long it took, but two soft sounds of dong dong on the carriage woke up the Queen Mother, who was thinking wildly. Your Majesty, the lanterns on the street are very beautiful. Would you like to come down and take a walk? A soft voice called. It was Su Buling. The Queen Mother was slightly confused, raised her hand to open the car window and took a look outside, but she was near the ferry bridge. Night has fallen quietly without realizing it. The long streets are brightly lit, and strings of lanterns are hung on the corners of the buildings along the inland river with a hint of water town charm, swaying gently in the evening breeze, emitting a dim light. On the bluestone long street, beside the quiet inland river, several spring willow trees hang down their willow branches. Young men and women wearing scholars' robes and ladies' clothes come down together. The boatman holding the boat on the river occasionally shouts and carries the boat passengers across a tower in the distance. Stone arch bridge over the river. On the stone arch bridge, there were several young men and women talking quietly to each other. The stone arch bridge is a building from the previous dynasty. It is said that a goddess once descended to earth and met a scholar on the bridge and fell in love with each other, so it was named Fairy Bridge. No one knows whether the legend is true or not, but this place has always been a place where men and women meet each other. It's a good place for meetings, the night view is beautiful, and there are many places where the dusk clouds and morning rain fall. The Queen Mother also came here to enjoy the scenery, but after entering the palace, she never came here again. After all, this is a place for young people. The Queen Mother looked at the beautiful scenery outside the car window for a long time, shook her head and chuckled, "Just take a look here. If you go out, there will be a big fight, which will disturb the interest of those little mandarin ducks. As the Queen Mother, she must be cheered and cheered when going out. There is no chance to walk alone on the street. As soon as she shows up, both sides of the street will be cleared." Su Buling stood outside the car window with a smile on his face. The Queen Mother can just change her clothes. As for her safety, as long as I am here, no one in the world can get even half a step closer to the Queen Mother. The guards can follow her from a distance. The Queen Mother blinked her eyes, hesitated for a moment, glanced at Su Buling, and then looked at the buildings in the small street full of spring breeze. Finally, she made a move and closed the car window. "Chiao Yi, come in." "Yes." Chiao Yi quickly got into the carriage, a little confused. The Queen Mother closed the doors and windows, then took off her clothes in twos and twos, pulled Chiao Yi over and stripped her clean, put on the ordinary maid uniform, and found a sunshade from the small cabinet in the carriage. She covered her face with a veil, picked up the bronze mirror and looked at it for a few times. After making sure that there was nothing wrong, she dropped the naked Chiao Yi and left the carriage alone. Su Buling stood waiting outside the carriage. When he saw her coming out, he raised his hand to help her. Naturally, the Queen Mother would not come into contact with a man easily. She quietly rolled her eyes at Su Buling, jumped down from the waist-high edge of the car, and waved casually, "Hurry up, the palace door will be closed later. I can't go back." After saying that, he ran towards the bustling street. This impatient look, although the metaphor is not appropriate, is really like a runaway horse. Naturally, nothing would go wrong if Su Buling was there. The Queen Mother asked the guards and palace maids to keep a suitable distance while she took Su Buling to the street. The street in Fairy Bridge is not long, and the shops on the street sell rouge, jewelry, books, paintings, and other items. There were many men and women coming and going, some were smiling or chatting happily, and there was no loose behavior. The whole street was full of a warm atmosphere of passionate but polite. The Queen Mother is not very old, but her figure and temperament are outstanding. Needless to say, Su Buling would attract shy or jealous looks wherever he went. Walking on the street at this time, naturally attracted a lot of looking eyes. The Queen Mother put her hands on her waist, trying to think of herself as a lady taking her juniors out for fun. She looked at the various people on the street with calm eyes. After taking a few steps, she couldn't restrain herself. She looked back and said softly, "No, speaking of it, this is the first time I've been out on the street alone since I entered the palace 10 years ago, haha, I almost forgot what it felt like." Su Buling walked beside him and nodded slightly, "If the Queen Mother likes it, I will just come over to accompany you more often in the future. It is not a big deal." The Queen Mother frowned and thought for a moment, then shook her head slightly. "In the past, I did like to go out for a walk, but after living in Changal Palace for so many years, I have long been used to it. As a Queen Mother, you must pay attention to your manners and behavior, and be outside all day long. Wandering around, if the clan knows about it, it will be difficult for the Holy One to explain." Su Buling didn't talk much. He glanced around, then raised his finger and pointed at the small pier on the street. Does the Queen Mother want to take a boat? The boats on the river are used to enjoy the flower street lights. There are often boatmen waiting for guests on the street. The Queen Mother looked at it for a few times and smiled softly. You're here, it's okay to sit for a while, let's go. After saying that, she set off and walked in front, down the stone steps to the riverside, holding up her skirt. With a slight jump, I jumped onto the small boat, and ripples appeared on the calm river. Su Buring got on the boat immediately afterwards and sat down on the futon prepared for the guests. The Queen Mother leaned on the edge of the boat and looked at the rows of lanterns hanging on both sides of the river. The boat floated slowly down the street. The Queen Mother kept watching the scenery on the street, and she was very fascinated. Because there were too few opportunities to go out and enjoy the scenery, she would have to return to the birdcage in Changal Palace soon. Maybe this I will never have the opportunity to sit on a boat and explore the streets without any restrictions in my life. Su Buling didn't say anything, he just took off the wine gourd from his waist and poured himself a drink beside him. The Queen Mother watched alone for a moment as the boat slowly crossed the ferry bridge across the long street, blocking her view. Only then did the Queen Mother look away from the street. Feeling that she had been left out, she sat up slightly, regained her usual dignified appearance, and asked with a smile. Su Buletinling, do you have something to ask of me? Su Buling put down the wine gourd and smiled warmly. Why did the Queen Mother say this? There was a hint of scrutiny in the Queen Mother's eyes, and she looked Su Buling up and down. I am not Hongluan. I have been learning about power and scheming since I was a child. Although I am not good at it, I still know a little, to be courteous for nothing, to be either an adulterer or a thief. What have you been doing recently? A little too enthusiastic about me. Su Buling shook his head gently, showing a bit of helplessness. Isn't this an apology to the Queen Mother? As long as the Queen Mother doesn't blame me secretly. If you return the things to me, I will naturally not complain about you. The Queen Mother snorted lightly, supported her cheek with her hands, looked at the brightly lit street again, and thought carefully. I know how powerful locking dragon goo is, and the Xiao family has no way to detoxify it. It's not that I don't tell you, you are Su Lai's descendant, so you have to be responsible and courageous. Live when a man should live, and die when he should die. It's not good to do something against your will to protect yourself. For example, last time you ran into my bed, if General Su knew about it, he would have to break two of your legs. Thank you, Queen Mother, for your teaching. Put yourself in my own shoes. I'm afraid I'm more anxious than you are. But as a king, you must be mentally tougher than ordinary people. No matter how dangerous the situation is, you should focus on the people of the world instead of just looking at yourself. A life. The Xiao family of Weinan, are said to have been the prime minister for 3 dynasties and generations. In other words, I am also a slave of the 3 surnames. However, my Xiao family has always had a clear conscience, because my ancestral motto of the Xiao family is to seek the world for the people, not for the sake of the world. 1 family and 1 surname seek the world. The Queen Mother was good at seducing, and she actually wanted to enlighten Su Buling and let him shift his attention from the dragon locking goo to other things. After all, in her heart, there was no cure for the dragon locking goo and it was meaningless to think about it. Su Buletinling's expression was as calm as ever, he nodded gently and looked at her with a smile. In the future, I will put my thoughts on the people of the world. The Queen Mother was helpless, knowing that there was no use in persuading such things, so she had no choice but to calm down and look at the lantern above. It's getting late, so let's go back to the palace to avoid the people in the palace gossiping. By the way, in a few days, Your Majesty, if you are entertaining the envoys of Northern Qi, you should also come and have a look. After you become king, you will also have to deal with Northern Qi. After saying this, the Queen Mother stood up, asked the boatman to dock, took Su Buling with her to the small street, and walked side by side to the carriage at the other end of the street. Dreaming with bright lights, dim stars. As she embarked on her way home, the Queen Mother's steps slowed down again. She would look back after taking a few steps, but she didn't know what she was looking at. Su Buling walked in front, and after noticing her movements, he said softly, "Your Majesty, do you want to go shopping again?" The Queen Mother came back to her senses, shook her head and smiled gently, "I can't see enough, but I'm just a little bit reluctant. No matter how high your status is, you can't do whatever you want. It's in vain. This kind of opportunity to walk on the street may be just this once. I always feel that there is something shortcoming." Su Buring frowned slightly and looked back at the lanterns on the street. "What's the shortcoming?" "Well," turned and walked towards the street. The Queen Mother looked back slightly confused. Unexpectedly, at this glance, I saw a beautiful young man dressed in white, standing beside the candidates on the street, choosing among them. His expression was serious, but his behavior was a bit childish. How could the prince of a feudal lord buy candidates in person? The Queen Mother paused in her tracks, her eyes reflecting the lights, but she didn't know how to describe this feeling. In a moment of confusion, the young man in white ran back, holding up a red candidates with a smile on his face. "Queen Mother." The Queen Mother stood among the lanterns on the street and blinked. She looked down at the candidates in front of her. It was a little funny, but she couldn't laugh for some reason. After a long time, she pursed her lips, raised her hand and took the candidates, which is only eaten by children, and whispered, "Road. You boy, I am already so old, and you are not young anymore. You should pay attention to the prince's demeanor. Does the Queen Mother like it?" The Queen Mother glanced at Su Buling, turned around and continued walking, whispering something vaguely. "I like it, but I like it. As long as you like it, why worry about other people's opinions?" "That's true." The Queen Mother held the candidates, covering her face with her sleeves, and took a bite of the crispy candidates in her red lips. She noticed that Su Buling was smiling, glared fiercely, and hurried forward. The evening breeze blows softly in the small street, and the willows hug the river. The talented man and the beautiful woman walked together on the roadside. The bright lights in the calm river made it difficult to tell whether they were the reflection of the lights or the stars in the sky. The two people, a few steps apart, seemed no different from the young men and women on the street, but the distance between them was farther than the stars in the sky. The Queen Mother walked out with a sweet and sour candidates in her mouth, and suddenly looked back at the young man in white walking behind her, raised her hand and smiled. She hurriedly turned back and walked forward with her head lowered. Unknowingly, a thought came to her mind: if it had been 10 years earlier, who would be willing to enter the palace and become the queen? But the Queen Mother quickly suppressed this inappropriate thought. After all, the fact was that she was the Queen Mother of Daewoo. Ah! A faint sigh sounded silently on the street. The Queen Mother looked at the candidates in her hand and suddenly felt reluctant to eat it. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 185. Boom. Boom. The sound of bells resounded throughout the majestic imperial city and the streets. Thick dark clouds hovered over Chang'an City with the force of pressing down on the city. Occasionally, a thunder struck across the sea of clouds, adding a bit of depression and solemnity to Chang'an on February 18. Dark clouds cover the sky, and a storm is coming. The dreary weather did not affect the various living things under the sky. Civil and military officials, princes, and ministers, dressed in court uniforms, neatly passed through the royal road under the palace gate. The people in the market were even more excited. They gathered in the markets near the imperial city before dawn, talking about the grand meeting that was going to be held today. Daewoo's martial ethos is integrated into his flesh and blood. Nothing can attract more attention than a battle between warriors. Once this matter is placed between the two countries, it will not be as simple as just watching the excitement. From ancient times to the present, nothing can be more inspiring than a strong national power, and showing off one's might before converting foreign barbarians is naturally the best way to demonstrate a strong national power in peacetime. It seems to be just an ordinary competition to make friends with martial arts, but the result concerns the hearts and minds of the whole country. A few days ago, the envoys of the northern Qi dynasty implored the emperor to send a few of his peers to compete in front of the palace, which was equivalent to a bloodless war. The competition in the imperial city had not yet begun, and the entire Chang'an warriors focused their attention on the palace walls. Although ordinary people cannot watch, being able to listen to the news from well-connected people in wine shops and tea houses can be regarded as participating. Major gambling houses have also opened their markets one after another, and countless people have participated in betting. However, the bets are obviously not on who will lose or who will win, but on who is likely to appear and who will ultimately determine the victory. As for losing, in the capital of Daiyue, before the emperor arrives, there are millions of warriors in Chang'an. If they are beaten to the ground by a barbarian, they will no longer need to practice martial arts. They can all go home and herd cattle. The emperor will probably be punished. The imperial edict came to examine why the warrior's spine was broken 10 years ago. The common people in the market are enthusiastic, and so are the princes and sons of Kuishao Street. Wen Kuiyuan of the Imperial College had a rare day off, because today all the princes and nobles in Wen Kuiyuan were absent from class, and there was not a single student. Song Yufu came over to study early, and when she found no one there, she skipped class with a bit of excitement, trotted back to the alley of Zuji Street, and slapped on the closed courtyard door. "Uncle Su, Uncle Su." Dong dong dong. The knock on the door was like beating a drum. After a while, the courtyard door opened, and Su Danking looked at his niece outside the door with some helplessness. "What's wrong?" Song Yufu said excitedly, "Uncle Su promised to help me draw a portrait last time. Today, Crown Prince Su will also go to the palace to watch the warriors fight. Let's go over and have a look. You can stand by and draw secretly." There was a hint of sadness in Su Danking's eyebrows. Painting and writing poetry are all about a flash of inspiration. "Last time the Queen Mother came over and almost beat my uncle to death, I have been in no mood these past few days." Song Yufu smiled coquettishly. A gentleman should be tolerant. This is not the first time that Uncle Su has been bullied by the Queen Mother. Just get used to it. Let's just go and see the martial arts. Uncle Su is also a Jianghu man. Su Danking sighed. "What's so interesting about the younger generation's fighting?" "That's all. Let me go with you. Don't blame Uncle if you can't draw it." Then he took out the oil paper umbrella from the house and closed the door. The two walked through the neighborhoods together, and after arriving at the imperial city, they found Song Baking, who had entered the palace. Under Song Baking's leadership, they came to the veranda on the side of Tai Chi Palace. It was still early, and there were still umbrellas and chairs arranged outside the majestic Tai Chi Hall. The white jade square in front of the hall was spotless, with swords, guns, swords and halberds placed around it. Behind it was the grandstand, with several dragon flags planted on the fence of the grandstand. A lot of people had gathered by then, including civil and military officials, princes and ministers, but most of them were young ladies from wealthy families who came with their parents to join in the fun. Most of the people had no seats and could only stand. Su Danking is very famous and belongs to the class of celebrities. At this time, people from Mo Danking arrived in the imperial city and came to greet him politely. Song Yufu followed her father and uncle to the stands near the stands filled with celebrities and scholars. She leaned out of the fence and took a few glances. There were 6 of the 7 vassal princes. In the direction where the northern Qi envoys were sitting, there was a young man from the imperial city carrying a sword. The person should be Zhou Yizi, who was sent by northern Qi to call the formation. Being far away, Song Yufu squinted her eyes and looked carefully. The young man was about 20 years old. He was wearing a black robe and had a feminine face. The hair is loose and only tied up with cloth ropes. As the saying goes, etiquette begins with formal attire, and this crown refers to the hair crown. Strictly speaking, the Northern Qi dynasty is also a native of the Central Plains, and its customs are exactly the same as those of Daewoo. However, after Jiazi lost the Central Plains and was driven to Mobei, the men of the Northern Qi dynasty all wore their hair disheveled to show that they did not forget the shame. They vowed not to raise their crowns until they regained the Central Plains. It has become a habit after Jiazi. Song Yufu was not interested in warriors. After a quick glance, she moved her gaze to the left and right sides of the Tai Chi hall. Unfortunately, she could not find any sign of Su Buling. She sat down sadly and looked around in boredom, waiting. Next to Taiji Palace, Changle Palace still looked deserted. Dark clouds obscured the sky, making the palace with only a few people even more deserted. Only a few maids walked around occasionally. Su Buling stood in the corridor of the Queen Mother's chamber, standing with his hands behind his hands and waiting quietly. Because he was attending a palace gathering today, he was dressed more formally. He wore a white gold-rimmed prince's robe with auspicious beasts outlined on it, a jade pendant hanging around his waist, and a crown between his hair. With a gold hairpin and a stern face, it seems that he is not angry and has a strong sense of authority. Mrs. Lu was not interested in martial arts competitions and did not come with her today. She was still chattering with Ningyu at home. Thinking of this, Su Buling felt a little funny. Mrs. Lu asked Ningyu He to be his master on a whim, but she seemed to regret it after returning home. Perhaps because she felt it was too hasty, she forced Ningyu He to stay at Xiao's house for a few days, probably for inspection. Su Buling was still worried about how to contact Ningyu He, but the result was good. He couldn't even see Ningyu He after returning home. It is estimated that Mrs. Lu would not be able to complete the inspection in less than 10 days and a half. Su Buling didn't have any objections to this. He was happy without having to contact Ningyu He, and of course he had no intention of actively looking for him. Today there is a competition in the Imperial City, and the Queen Mother will go there to watch it later. She invited him a few days ago, so he naturally came over early. He thought he could be alone with the Queen Mother for a while, but he didn't expect there was a light bulb next to him. In the veranda outside the palace, young Master Xiaoting, dressed in a yellow robe, holding a white jade folding fan, chattered endlessly. "Old Su, your martial arts skills are pretty good. Who do you think has a better chance of winning today? I bet Tangju or 1,000 taels of silver on him to lose. This money is all my aunt's private money. I'm feeling very nervous right now. Please comfort my uncle." Su Buling came back to his senses and glanced at Xiaoting. Because of the Queen Mother, he was now much more polite to Xiaoting. Zhou Yizi studied under the Northern Qi State Master Zhou Qingkaiu. Zhou Qingkaiu's swordsmanship ranks among the top 3 in the Northern Qi dynasty. The apprentices he taught are not bad. Tang Juer is the face of the Tang family, but the name of the Tang family's sword comes from a shady origin, and the actual background is far inferior. Other aristocratic families. I met Tang Juer last time. He is more conceited and difficult to win. Situ Huiyu is much more stable. Xiaoting felt relieved immediately and patted his chest. "That's good, I feel relieved with your words." Su Buling was a little helpless. Daewoo and Northern Qi competed. If the person you bet on Daewoo loses, wouldn't it mean that he has more ambition? Hey, Xiaoting waved his hand, as if he had come before. "Don't you understand this? The person I bet on Daewoo loses. If Tang Juer wins, he will feel happy after losing money. If Tang Juer loses, he will not feel happy but makes money. It can be said that it is a guaranteed profit without losing money. Then you should bet on Situ Huiyu for the finale. If I take Situ Huiyu, I will lose money without any suspense. What's the point of playing? These 1,000 taels are to buy rouge for my aunt. If I lose. Xiaoteng. While he was speaking, a trembling scolding sounded from behind. Xiaoting jumped 3 feet in the air, held his head and said incoherently, "Auntie, I'm just kidding, I haven't spent any money, don't stew me." Su Buring turned around and saw the Queen Mother standing under the eaves of the palace with her eyes wide open, looking like she hated the iron. Because she was attending a formal occasion, the Queen Mother dressed extremely solemnly. She wore a red dress, a phoenix crown on her head, and a belt around her waist. Her gourd-like figure was fully displayed, but she was not at all frivolous and unrestrained, both inside and out. Beauty and elegance. The Queen Mother was a little angry at first and wanted to let the palace maid pull Xiaoting down to stew. After seeing Su Buring turn around, her expression slowly softened and she just snorted lightly. "It's not easy for me to save some money. If you take money from me all day long, why don't you ask your father for it?" Xiaoting's face was full of horror, and he whispered, "Auntie, you live in the palace, it's useless to ask for money." Snap! Su Buling raised his hand and slapped Xiaoting on the forehead. Xiaoting groaned, still a little innocent, "Su Buling, why are you beating me? My aunt is standing here, how could it be that you don't even pay attention to the Queen Mother?" The Queen Mother's face turned red with anger. If she hadn't finally packed up her clothes, she would have gone up to Xiaoting in person. Su Buling couldn't stand these idiots, so he stepped forward with a smile and said, "Queen Mother, it's almost time, I'll send you there." As the saying goes, I'm afraid of comparison, but the Queen Mother's comparison made her feel that God is not very discerning. She glared at Xiaoting and said, "Get away as far as you can, or else I will go hang in the garden." As if Xiaoting had been pardoned, he turned around and ran away without saying a word. Su Buling secretly breathed a sigh of relief. He called the chariot with a smile and asked the Queen Mother to come up. Then he walked beside the chariot and headed to the Tai Chi Hall together. 2 chapters of 6,000 words are equivalent to 3 chapters. The plot behind is relatively big. Today I coded 17,000 words. I really can't hold it anymore. I'll make up for it after sorting it out during the day. If I haven't sorted it out, it will be tomorrow. The acknowledgements will be posted tomorrow. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 186. Dark clouds seemed to be gathering above the dome of the Tai Chi Hall, and the cool wind blew the dragon flag, making a soft puff sound. As the time approached, people gathered around the white jade square outside the Taiji Hall. Even if it was just the courtiers and dignitaries, there were thousands of people gathered, plus the imperial guards and wolf guards. At a glance, it was densely packed with people, and they were talking softly and seemed to be gathering. It was a bit noisy. Below the Taiji Hall, several desks were lined up, and several officials from the Ministry of Rites were sitting among them to chat with the envoys of the Northern Qi dynasty. Xiao Chuang and other 3 princes and 9 ministers were at the center, quietly waiting for the emperor to arrive. Grand Sinong Luchengan was sitting on the left-hand side of Xiao Chuang. He looked at a middle-aged man wearing Northern Qi official robes in the distance, frowned slightly and said, "Xiao Xiang, the person coming from Northern Qi this time is Chen Xian, the counselor of Prince Zhou. Chen Xian is rumored to be very thoughtful and will not make a rash provocation if he is unsure. I am afraid that today's discussion will not go smoothly." Xiao Chuang's expression was always calm, and he pondered for a moment. The Holy Emperor was too involved in the Iron Eagle hunting deer 10 years ago, which caused Dao Wuren to almost collapse. If he loses today, there will be complaints everywhere. Chen Xian is probably the same. This is why I will send people to call for formation when the Holy One chooses the top 10 warriors. If we win, it will damage the morale of our army and people in Daewoo, but if we lose, it will not damage Northern Qi at all, but if the opponent comes, the Holy One has to accept it. Lu Chang'an nodded lightly, judging from Prime Minister Xiao, what are the chances of winning? Xiao Chuang was not a martial artist, so he didn't know how likely it was. He turned to look at Lieutenant Lu Pingyang. Lu Pingyang was in charge of Daewoo's military power and his own martial arts skills were also good. He chuckled and said, "Don't worry, Mr. Xiao. Not to mention the army and people of Daewoo, there are millions of warriors in Chang'an City alone. Your Majesty has been prepared in advance. Even if that boy from Northern Qi has a famous teacher, it is just a dream to overpower my Daewoo generation." Xiao Chuang nodded calmly and had no comment on this. Beside the desk in the distance, the Northern Qi envoy Chen Xian chatted with Daewoo officials for a few words, then got up and went to a room in the back hall. At the window of the room, a young man with long hair shawl was leaning against the window holding a sword, looking at the princes and generals of Daewoo with a bit of impatience in his eyes. Chen Xian, with an elegant face, walked up to him and raised his hand gently. "Yezi, you are going to play soon, how are you preparing?" Zoyza didn't even turn his head. "We just met, they are all small fish and shrimps, and they don't know how to become a leader in Chang'an. Back then, our great Qi capital was Chang'an, and there were not more than 100 corpses under the title of Wukuai. I'm too embarrassed to declare my family status, and those juniors probably haven't even killed anyone." Chen Xian was not surprised by this comment. The people of the Central Plains were very fond of martial arts, and Daewoo also relied on martial arts to build its country, and there were originally many heroes. But 10 years ago, Emperor Daewoo felt that the warriors were lawless and made a stupid move. He swept across the rivers and lakes with his iron cavalry and directly broke the backbone of Daewoo warriors. The whole generation has been supporting it, and the proud sons of heaven among the new generation are all embroidered pillows piled in the greenhouse with gold and silver wealth. The Northern Qi dynasty was different. They were burdened with national humiliation and struggled to survive in the barren Mobei. There were also powerful enemies in the Central Plains, and some of the famous young people were created with human heads. Zoyzi has been killing people with a knife since he was 6 years old. He studied under the imperial master for 3 years and then was thrown into the thousands of miles of desert to practice. Day and night, he fought bloody battles with horse bandits for a mouthful of food and a mouthful of water. He is only 18 years old today, but he has been licking blood for 9 years. He can't even remember the people he killed. When it comes to martial arts, he has few rivals among his peers in Northern Qi, but he has never officially come out of the army. Chen Xian looked at a group of Daewoo princes and princesses standing near the square, and said softly, "Martial men speak with their swords. Today is your first battle out of the mountain. Fight well and don't lose the reputation of your master." Zoyza showed no expression at all. "If it's just these people, don't worry Mr. Chen, I heard that there is a Meikushan in Chang'an, who is known as One Sword Moves Chang'an. I came here this time to meet him, but why didn't I come?" Chen Xian shook his head. "Green bamboo plum wine, happy life accompanies Qu. If he were here, I wouldn't have brought you here. Mei Chu left Chang'an the year before his death. The most powerful person in Chang'an City is Su Buletin, Prince Su's son. Make." Zoyza showed a bit of disappointment and said calmly, "Back in the desert, when I heard the name of Su, I chased him, but it was a pity that his horse was too good and I didn't catch up. I looked at the traces at that time and saw that the horse was a bandit. No one left a whole corpse in the lair, and both men and horses were torn apart. If I hadn't seen the Jingguan piled outside the bandit's lair, I would have thought it was the work of a pack of wolves. It was indeed too powerful to be human, but I heard that he was locked up. Dragon goo is useless." Chen Xian nodded lightly, with a slight look of disdain in his eyes. "The emperors and generals of Daewoo, among other things, are absolutely superb in conspiracy and calculation. I don't know who has the brains to use dragon-locking poison to kill the master of the Ziliang Iron Cavalry. Plan. Zhou shrugged his shoulders. Every dog is slaughtered for righteousness, and a scholar is responsible for betrayal. The world is determined to have to kill donkeys. The two great swordsman masters Lu and Zhu have been upright in their lives, but they were killed just because they disobeyed and used dirty methods. What's so strange about destroying the Su family now? Alas, whether the Su family is destroyed by the Daio court itself, or if the Su family changes its family and joins me in Daki, Prince Zhou will laugh out of his dreams. Chen Xian shook his head. The Su family is the Su family after all. It has been guarding the country for 60 years and has not retreated even half a step. Even if the whole family is exterminated, it is impossible to surrender to the Qi dynasty. Su Lai's remaining power is still there. No matter how stupid Emperor Daio is, he will not dare to kill them all. But now we can cut off some flesh from the Su family, and it will be easier to deal with the Su family when the imperial master has finished setting up the situation. Being beaten on both sides, the Su family is quite pitiful. If it were my Daki son, he would have rebelled long ago. Haha, isn't this just bullying an honest person? Who makes the Su family full of loyal people? If you let your ministers die, they will have to die. On the veranda on the side of the Taiji Hall, the Queen Mother walked slowly with Su Buling and a group of palace maids, and came to sit on a soft couch covered by a bead curtain. Su Buling sat on the small table next to him. Next to him was the Song family. Royal. Because of the visit to Ferry Bridge last time, the Queen Mother's attitude towards Su Buling changed a lot. She didn't even ask about her belly band. After throwing Xiaoting away, she asked in a friendly way. No, has Ning Yu taught you swordsmanship in the past few days? Because there were people around, Su Buling still looked cold and shook his head gently. Aunt Lu called Taoist Master Ning over to give lectures. I can't see anyone. How can I teach him swordsmanship? The Queen Mother was not surprised by this. Hongluan is like this. I found a master for you on a whim, but I am afraid that you and the master will not get close to her. By the way, today's competition is very important. If you lose, your Majesty will be disgraced. You just said that Tang Juer couldn't beat him, so that junior named Sidu should be fine, right? Su Buling nodded. Sidu Hui learned from Sidu Yuejin, the first person in the Tianese martial arts world. He is invincible in the world with his 28-step chain sword. As the saying goes, a tiger's father has no dog son. As long as Sidu Hui has learned half of it, he will be fine. The Queen Mother felt a little more at ease, thought about it, and sighed softly. It would be great if you had a way to detoxify. If nothing else, I think I would be more confident about this kind of fighting in the ring. Su Buring smiled lightly and said nothing. After waiting for a moment, as a figure wearing a fiery red python robe appeared in the Tai Chi hall, the noisy crowd quieted down and looked upward. The Emperor Songji walked slowly to the front of the palace in his dragon robe. He bowed to the Queen Mother before sitting down on the dragon chair. See your Majesty. The roar of the mountain sounded like the ocean tide in Nyoda's Tai Chi palace. After Songji glanced at it, his expression was warm. After casually saying a few words, he gently raised his hand. Let's get started. Clang. A gong sounded throughout the imperial city. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 187. Chapter 98 Wu Wu Er. The dragon flag is displayed in front of the Taiji Hall. From the dragon chair in Songji, you can see Chengtian Gate, Zuk Gate, and Zuk Street, which span the entire Chang'an to the end of the sky. Around the White Jade Square, almost all the core members of Daio's top floor gathered here, sitting upright in silence, waiting for a small competition that seemed not very important, but related to the majesty of the two countries. Eunuch Chia, the general manager of the palace, served as the master of ceremonies for this contest because of his position and status in the world. At this time, wearing a big red robe and holding a fly whisk, he walked down the royal road and came to the middle of the square in front of the palace. The envoys of the state of Qi recently came to Chang'an to pay homage to the Holy One. The two countries have lived together peacefully for nearly a century and have been in constant contact with each other. I am a great warrior, and there are many strange people in the streets and mountains. The Holy One intends to appoint the top 10 warriors to encourage the warriors to reshape their martial arts. Virtue. The envoy Qi heard about it the day before yesterday and wanted to use martial arts to make friends. He and I, the great Yuer, have tried their hand at each other. Your Majesty agreed, and I will set up a martial arts competition in front of the Taiji Hall today. I hope that the two men will express their feelings regardless of their previous grudges. The so-called use of force to make friends is just a talk for the occasion. Northern Qi dynasty daimyo still has a truce rather than an armistice. This arena is a competition between the two countries. It is like holding a sports meeting in your own home. It is said that friendship comes first and competition comes second, but in fact it is a matter of life and death. Eunuch Chia's voice had the voice of a male duck, but it was extremely loud. Thousands of people around the square could hear it clearly. They all looked forward to it with eager eyes. The envoys of the northern Qi dynasty stood up and bowed to the emperor in front of the palace to thank him. After Eunuch Chia finished speaking, he waved his hand to dust the dust, and the royal forest army moved all the weapons they could find in the world to the surrounding areas. The rules of a warrior are, one stands and the other lies down. As the saying goes, the sword has no eyes, and those who compete take life and death at their own risk, but only those who have martial virtues in their hearts are warriors. They have to be able to lose as well as win. Everyone, let's get started. Clang. The gong half as tall as a man rang, and there was some noise in front of the Taiji Hall. They all looked at the team of Northern Qi envoys. Songji was holding the teacup with one hand, his expression was dull and he couldn't tell what he was thinking. Zhang Xiang, Lu Yunlin and others were guarding the surrounding area with their swords pressed. From time to time they looked up at the sea of clouds in the sky, as if they were worried about whether it would rain and disturb the Lord's mood. The Queen Mother behind the bead curtain was obviously a little interested because she usually had nothing to do. She sat up straight and waited intently. Su Buling looked at the Queen Mother, not showing the slightest interest in the scene below. Tread. After the gong sounded, a figure appeared first in the square that was 1,000 steps long and wide. Zhou strode forward with his long sword in hand, seemingly not seeing the thousands of eyes on him. He walked straight past dozens of lampposts standing in the square and arrived at the center of the entire imperial city, facing the royal road. The gilded soft couch above raised his hand and bowed. Foreign Minister Zhou, please see Emperor Daiyue. No gift. Songji raised his dragon sleeves and followed the procedure, looking at the young hero sitting in the audience. Zhou is a direct disciple of the imperial master of Qi state. He is expected to have a good career in art. Is there anyone willing to challenge? On the side of the square, under the eaves where young people gathered, many Chang'an leaders looked at each other and wanted to send someone to try it first. But Zhou had no intention of waiting quietly. He saluted Emperor Daiyue again and said loudly. Foreign Minister Zhou came today as a warrior to ask for advice. It is an honor for His Majesty the Emperor to agree to treat him according to the rules of a warrior. However, there should be good news for warriors to compete. There are so many pillars of Daiyue Kingdom present. If we only look at a few juniors, I'm afraid I'm not in the mood for a fight. As soon as this statement came out, it attracted everyone's attention. Songji was holding the teacup, his expression as lukewarm as ever. What jackpot do you want? Zhou held the 3-foot green sword and looked at the princes in the audience. I heard that His Majesty the Emperor is going to appoint the top 10 warriors. If the foreign minister wins the first prize in front of the Taiji Hall today, can the emperor give the foreign minister the golden plaque of number 1 in the world in advance? As soon as the statement came out, the whole place was in an uproar. Zhang Xiang frowned while pressing Yan Ling Dao, and said in a cold voice, "This guy is so arrogant. I thought he just wanted the position of military leader, but he never wanted to be the number 1 in the world. A frog in a well doesn't know how high the sky is." Zhang Tingbao was also a little annoyed. It's just a competition among peers. Even if I win, I can't be the best in the world. How can there be such a thing as gifting it in advance? If my daio's golden plaque of being the best in the world is in the northern Qi dynasty, wouldn't it make everyone in the world laugh? Die. There was constant noise and sarcasm. Song Ji also raised his eyebrows slightly, obviously feeling that the young man below him was too loud. His original intention was to give him the title of 10th in the world, but no one was convinced even if he appointed number 1 in the world. With a bit of anger in her eyes, the Queen Mother turned her head and whispered, "No, this kid is crazier than you. There are many strange people in the world. From ancient times to the present, those who dare to be called the best in the world have all gained this reputation since childhood. He is a famous figure in the world, but I have never heard of his name." Su Buling shook his head and chuckled, picked up the wine glass and took a sip, finally focusing on Zhou. There is a huge difference between pride and arrogance. Anyone who dares to say this in front of the Tai Chi Palace must at least be brave enough. Among the officials, Censor Qi Xinggan had the most fiery temper. He stood up and said sarcastically, "The competition between the younger generations is like child's play in the eyes of the elders. Even if the Holy One is willing to grant a golden plaque, how can you, a child with a yellow mouth who has not yet reached the crown, dare to accept the title of no? Don't you teach humility and self-awareness, respect for elders and younger ones?" Normally, everyone would regard Qi Xinggan as a stinking stone in the manhole, but in this kind of external scolding situation, he would be regarded as the backbone. At this time, everyone nodded in agreement with this sentence. Zhou raised his hand, his eyes slightly unruly. "My husband will naturally teach the elders and younger ones, but there is no second place in martial arts. I, Zhou, a first-level foreign minister, am only 20 years old. If I can stand to the end in front of His Majesty Emperor Daio today, the result will not change 10 years later. What's wrong with accepting the golden plaque of number 1 in the world in advance? Okay. If you are not convinced, you can come and take it away. Why bother arguing with words?" Qi Xinggan was immediately speechless. This is the core of the battle between civil and military forces. As the saying goes, when a scholar meets a soldier, he cannot explain why. A warrior will only recognize the one who is standing. If he is beaten to the ground by a yellow-haired boy in front of the emperor, then it is indeed the right thing to do. People come first. As for letting Eunuchio wait for the older generation to snatch him back, Daio couldn't afford to lose this person. Tai Wei Lu Pingyang was originally a martial artist. At this time, he was obviously annoyed by this young boy. He slapped the table and said angrily, "The Holy One has appointed Daio as the top 10 warriors. How can you, a foreign envoy from northern Qi, ask me, Daio, to be number 1 in the world? You should ask the monarch of Qi for it." This was a bit disrespectful, and even Song Ji frowned. Sure enough, when Zhou heard these words, he immediately curled up his lips, spread his hands and looked at the civil and military officials. The world is under heaven, under the sky. His Majesty Emperor Daio has appointed the top 10 warriors in the world. Why can't I, Zhou, take it? Is it possible that in the eyes of the generals and ministers, His Majesty Emperor Daio's vision is only within the 280 states of the 9 roads, and the outer territories, such as the Lingnan Road that has not yet been recovered, are not considered the world? I, the monarch of Qi state, evaluates the heroes of the world, but I have never missed one of Dao's talents. You. Lu Pingyang immediately flew into a rage, his face turned livid with anger, but he couldn't say a word. Being made jealous by others and framing the matter in the eyes of the emperor, what he said just now, as the Tai Wei in charge of Dao's troops, was indeed too petty. The opponent caught him with his painful leg and went online. Everyone around the square was silent for a while. Qi Xinggan almost fainted from the anger of this pig teammate. The Queen Mother was also full of anger, but she had no choice but to look at Songji to see how he would respond. Songji was free and easy, and clapped his hands. I am very articulate, but I don't know how good my skills are. If you can stand to the end today, I will give you a Kinkui gold plaque. As for number 1 in the world, 10 years from now come and get it yourself if you can. The meaning of Qingkui is simple and clear. It means the leader among young people. He is different from the 10 Wukui. His reputation is not weak, so his handling can be said to be very clever. However, the leader of Dao's younger generation is in northern Qi, which is also not very popular. Sidu Hu, Tang Zhuer, Zhang Tingbao and other young people who are going to play today are all agitated. They dare not accept the golden plaque of the 10 Wukui, but this Qingkui can be competed for. Wu Wu is the second. They are of the same age, so it's hard to tell who will win and who will lose in a real fight. In the center of Tai Chi Square, Zhou was still speaking arrogantly. After hearing Songji's words, he raised his hand and said, "Thank you for the gift, Your Majesty. 10 years from now, the foreign minister will definitely go to the appointment to take away the number 1 in the world golden plaque." Snored. This statement can be said to have angered the civil and military officials of the court who were watching. Lu Pingyang had just lost an adult. At this time, he was furious and slapped the table. "Changrun, come up." Lu Changrun, who was sitting in the back, was originally dissatisfied with the arrogant attitude of the northern Qi envoy. Without any hesitation, he stood up and walked down the steps of the side hall, took a big gun from the weapons rack, and came directly to Zhou. "Please recommend monthly tickets. The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 188. Thick black clouds gathered in the sky, and 4 auspicious beasts on the eaves of the dark palace faced the sky. Everyone in Nyoda Imperial City held their breath and looked at the 2 figures who were as small as ants compared to the majestic palace city. Cha-cha. The snow-white spear was dragged in his hand, and the tip of the spear made a slight sound on the mirror-flat white jade square. Lu Changrun, who was dressed in a young man's robe, took off his outer shirt and only wore close-fitting clothes. He walked to the center of the square, held a gun in both hands and shook it violently. There was an explosion of pop, and the red tassel was extremely powerful in the vast and solemn world. Eye-catching. Guanzhong Road Lu family, Lu Changrun. Lu Changrun's martial arts skills were not bad, and he was considered a good player among the younger generation in Chang'an City. He was the first to appear on the stage, and he naturally won the admiration of everyone in the audience. Zhou looked up and down, raised the long black sheath sword in his hand, and said calmly, "Zhou." Clang. Next to the dragon chair, Eunuch Jia held a gong hammer wrapped in red cloth and struck the huge gong inscribed with the dragon. The whole audience was suddenly attentive, and no one even blinked, because the martial artist's attack would probably take place in just one breath. Ah! When Lu Changrun heard the sound of the gong, his whole body trembled. He raised his spear and ran forward with steady steps. The tip of the spear moved along a line without any sway. He used Jiangnan Liuhuman's signature skill Zhongping spear. Good dash. Just for this posture, Zhang Xiang, Lu Pingyang and other warriors expressed their approval. As the saying goes, a moonstick, a sword, a gun, a lifetime, and a sword always with you. It is not easy to use a gun well. Lu Changrun is only about 20 years old. This mid-level gun can be described as experienced. Unfortunately, Everyone's smiles did not last long. Zhou Yizi held his sword straight, as if he didn't see the spear point coming at him in stride, and just waited quietly. Suffer death. Seeing that the other party was so arrogant, Lu Changgrun's eyes naturally showed a bit of anger. Anyway, he was proud of his life and death when he entered the field. At that moment, his gun shot out like a dragon and stabbed Zhou Yizi straight into the heart. Zhongping Qiang pays attention to the spear is stuck in one line, with the head, spear, shoulders and knees flat, so it is also called Siping Qian. It uses all the strength of the whole body to thrust out, and it is difficult to defend it head-on. Just when everyone was wondering if Zhou Yizi was confused, they saw the slow-reacting young man in black. He waited until the spear pierced the long sword in his hand, then twisted his wrist, and the long sword slammed into the barrel of the gun. Snap! The big spear that Lu Changgrun thrust out with all his strength changed direction instantly and passed Zhou Yizi's waist without injuring his opponent at all. The smiling Zhang Xiang narrowed his eyes sharply, and a bit of surprise flashed in his eyes. What a strong hand! Eunuch Xia, who was in front of the emperor, shook his head before drawing the gun. Just when most people didn't react, Zhou Yizi, who had fired the big gun, didn't even bother to draw his sword, and raised his hand to grab Lu Changgrun's neck. Lu Changgrun thrust the gun out with all his strength, not expecting to be knocked off course. He rushed forward and fired the gun. Before he could stop, he was in front of Zhou Yizi. Before he could see the situation clearly, his neck tightened suddenly. Then the whole person was grabbed by the neck, lifted up high, and then slammed to the ground. Bang! The muffled sound spread far away. The tall Lu Changgrun fell to the ground like a broken sack. He fainted on the spot before he even had time to groan. The audience suddenly stopped talking, their eyes filled with astonishment. Tai Wei Lu Pingyang stood up violently, knocked over the desk in front of him, raised his finger and pointed to the center of the square, opening his mouth for a long time without saying anything. Xiao Chuang and other important figures in the court frowned, obviously not expecting Lu Changgrun to lie down so simply. Lost just like that. Even the Queen Mother, who was sitting behind the beaded curtain, had her mouth open and her eyes full of confusion. From the outside looking in, it felt like Lu Changgrun rushed over with great momentum, and then was grabbed by the neck and thrown to the ground. His movements were done in one go, just like a play on the stage. All the courtiers in the room were stunned. Only Zhang Tingbao, Tang Juer and others who knew martial arts had serious eyes. A layman looks at the excitement, an expert looks at the door. Just now, Zhou Yizi didn't draw his sword, but flipped the long sword tightly with his wrist, and missed the Zhongping spear, which is famous for its steadiness, accuracy, and ruthlessness. Even if Lu Changgrun is not good at academics and his moves are deadly, Zhang Tingbao secretly deduced that if he held the Yanling saber horizontally and did this, he would definitely not be able to hit the big gun. His father Zhang Xiang could, but Zhang Xiang was already famous all over the world. Thousands of people were slaughtered, but the opponent was less than 20. There was silence for a moment. Zhou Yizi lowered his head and looked at Lu Changgrun, who didn't know whether he was alive or dead. He turned around with some boredom and looked at the group of young people waiting to play on the side. If it's all such stinky fish and rotten shrimps, let's go together. His Majesty Emperor Daio will be upset when he sees them. You. Tang Juer, Sidu Huiyu and others looked warm and angry. Tang Juer sarcastically said. Lu Taiwei's son was born in the military. He is not a Jianghu person. Don't get carried away. Zhou Yizi raised his hand and said, come up and talk. Snap pop pop. In front of the Tai Chi hall, Song Ji's expression did not change much. He clapped his hands and said in approval, since ancient times, heroes have been born young, and it is a good thing to be young and energetic. Help Changgrun down, Tang Juer, you also use a sword, go up and talk to Zhou Ye, let's compete. Many courtiers with serious faces came back to their senses, although Lu Changgrun fell down, Lu Changrun was not very skilled in martial arts. He was just born as a general. It is normal for him to be unable to defeat a real martial arts master. Most of the martial arts attacks are just one move. The outcome is decided, so it's not surprising to lose so quickly, but there are still those who are at the bottom of the box that haven't come out yet. The courtiers secretly breathed a sigh of relief, and also praised a few words in front of the envoy Chen Xian to show the magnanimity of a great country. Tang Jue, dressed in military uniform, walked down the steps of the side hall with a long sword in hand, first bowed to Songji, then stood up straight, and also raised the long sword. Yuzhu Tang family, Tang Jue. There are 4 aristocratic families who use swords in Daiyue, namely the Lu family of Donghai, the Tang family of Yuzhu, the Zhu family, and the Cao family of Chu. Each family has its own swordsmanship. Among them, the Lu family is the leader, followed by the other 3 families. However, after the Lu and Zhu families were affected by Tai Ying's hunting deer, and the Cao family sealed their swords in a box due to old affairs, the Tang family gradually became the leader of the swordsmanship. The sword is a gentleman's weapon, and it is the weapon most commonly used by Jianghu people. The sword of the Tang family is famous for its hiding. It is light and ethereal, strange, and hard to find. It is also known as the green bamboo snake's mouth in the world. It will be retracted at a touch and will die if touched. Tang Jue is the legitimate son of the Tang family, the 9th oldest, but he has the most outstanding talent. In a world where the distinction between direct eldest son and eldest son is not so strict, he is basically the candidate to be the next head of the Tang family. The apprentice who comes to challenge the Northern Qi state master can also be regarded as evenly matched. After Zhou reported to his house with a long sword in his hand, another gong sounded in front of the Tai Chi hall. Everyone raised their minds and looked at the 2 young men with full attention, knowing that this was a tough battle. Tang Jue raised his long sword. Perhaps it was because Lu Changrun lost his master just now, so he did not choose to attack first, but waited for the opponent to make the first move and then he could break it. Hoo-hoo! The breeze ruffled the long hair that fell down. Zhou tilted his head slightly, and after seeing that Tang Jue had no intention of attacking, he took a step forward. Bang! The white jade brick cracked instantly, and the black robe turned into an after-image. A cold light flashed in mid-air. Choking. Just like this, there was a sword sound and a snow light. Zhou landed behind Tang Jue, and slowly put away the long sword that was as bright as new. He turned his head and looked down at the side hall where he was waiting to come on, and said in a calm voice. Next. Tang Jue was still holding his sword flat, his black hair slowly falling from his shoulders, a line of blood slowly sliding down his forehead, his face dull, and the hand holding the sword trembled slightly. After Zhou finished speaking, he turned around with contemptuous eyes. I almost forgot, I'm sorry, you will see blood when the sword is unsheathed. Your Tang family seems to have this rule too. This. Wow. The whole place was agitated, with the sounds of teacups knocking over and gasps coming one after another. Zhang Xiang subconsciously touched his neck. Zhang Tingbao, who was about to find another chance, froze on the spot, his eyes wide open in disbelief. The teacup in Songji's hand shook, and the tea spilled on the back of his hand without paying attention. His eyebrows were furrowed and he couldn't understand. Eunuch Jia sighed softly and said slowly. Your Majesty, Tang Jue underestimated the enemy. The courtiers present were furious. The civil servants, who had no martial arts skills, were almost furious. They asked Zhang Xiang and others angrily what happened and whether the Tang family was cheating. Even Xiao Chuang and others frowned, realizing something was wrong today. It's understandable that Tang Jue couldn't beat him. After all, warriors always miss when they compete. But the loser is uglier than Lu Changrun. Lu Chang'an rubbed his fingers and thought about it for a moment. The person who came here is not evil. I'm afraid today will not end well for the Lord, we can't lose any more. Xiao Chuang took a breath, picked up the teacup and took a sip. Tang Juer must have underestimated the enemy. Situ Huiyu has a calm personality and will not lose. Behind the bead curtain, the Queen Mother looked very annoyed, patted her tight thighs, and complained angrily. What kind of things are Zhang Xiang looking for? He can't even draw his sword, so he can at least hit him twice. What's going on? Su Buling took a sip from the wine glass, shook his head and said. Can't pull it out. The Queen Mother was a little anxious and gritted her teeth and said, this competition is related to the prestige of the country. If something goes wrong, where will the honor of the Holy Emperor and me be put? The warriors in the market will have to rebel. Twitter. Just when most of the warriors were silent and the rest were making random noises, a sudden burst of cheers sounded from the stands where the prince's sons gathered. Okay, okay. Nice fight, I win. The originally tense and silent atmosphere was a little baffled by this cheerful laughter. I thought the kid from Baiki was shouting, so I turned my head to look with angry eyes. Xiao Ting had one foot on the table and was bragging to several princes and princes that he had a sharp eye and had hit the mark. The Queen Mother's words stopped abruptly, and she clutched her phoenix skirt tightly, wishing she could find a hole in the ground to crawl into. Although it was a bit untimely, it still woke everyone up. Song Ji put down the teacup, shook his head, chuckled, and raised his hand. Tang Juer, it's a good thing for young people to be rubbed a little. Otherwise, how would they understand the green mountains outside the mountains and the buildings outside the mountains? You still need more training in the future, go on. Tang Ju, who had been stunned for a long time, looked at the sword that had not been drawn out, wiped the blood on his temples, bowed, and then left the scene in a daze. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 189. Boom. The lightning flashed across the sea of clouds like a dragon, illuminating the slightly dim Tai Chi hall as brightly as the snow. A few raindrops fell on the cracked white jade floor tiles, but no one paid attention to the weather at this time. Tread. The slightly heavy footsteps affected the minds of the entire Tai Chi palace. Situ Huiyu, a tall man, walked slowly towards the field with a 9-ring knife in his hand, with a bit of caution between his thick eyebrows, but without the slightest fear. He was the only one prepared by Daewoo. He is the most capable person in Chang'an City. If he loses again, he will be slapped hard on the emperor's face by someone from northern Qi in front of the civil and military officials of the court, and the emperor will have to accept it with a smile. There was no expression on Situ Huiyu's face. After saluting the emperor, he turned to Zhou Yizi, who was standing casually holding a sword. Qinrenmen, Situ Huiyu. Qinren means thousands of feet, and the name Qinrenmen means trying to be higher than the sky. The Situ family has dominated the Tianese Wulin for many years. The sect leader Situ Yuejin and the old sword master Zhu Silk Mountain were both known as the sword master. Even the current sword master Liu Beiming had to give a junior salute in front of him, which was considered a big deal. Yu is the most famous group of people in the world. Situ Huiyu has obtained the true inheritance of Situ Yuejin, and he is definitely not like the Tang family who relied on tricks to get to the top. Moreover, a martial artist's character has a great influence on his combat effectiveness. Even if he is equally skilled, but is impetuous and greedy for success, he will definitely not be able to defeat one who is perseverant and has a calm personality. Situ Huiyu's character was absolutely outstanding, and even Eunuch Jia spoke highly of him. The reason why the princes, generals, and ministers present have not lost control yet is because they still have a reassurance here. Zhou Yizi also became more serious at this time, and raised his hand first. I have heard about Situ Gong's name as Dao Kui for a long time, but unfortunately I have never been able to see him in Mobei. On behalf of my master, I would like to say hello to him. Situ Huiyu held the 9-ring knife upside down. There was no slightest contempt or restraint in his eyes, he just said calmly. If I have the chance, I will definitely go to northern Qi to pay homage to Zhou Gong. As soon as the words fell, the gong sounded. Clang. The whole audience held their breath, and even a bunch of civil servants who couldn't understand stretched their necks. Songji, who had always been calm and unfazed, didn't even notice the coolness of the tea in his hand. He brought it to his mouth and took a sip, his eyes locked on Zhou Yizi. Ah! A loud bang resounded throughout the imperial city. The 9-ring sword in Situ Huiyu's hand weighs 32 kilograms and is nearly 4 feet long. The 9 copper rings on the back of the sword can trap weapons such as swords and guns, and also serve as counterweights. After the explosion, the two stood up from the ground at the same time. Situ's 9-ring sword is domineering and emphasizes wide opening and closing. It is completely different from Zhang Xiang's Bagua sword. It swings like a windmill blade, but it does not appear clumsy at all. In an instant, it has reached within 10 steps. Choking. A cold light flashed. The Qingfeng long sword in Zhou Yi's hand was completely in everyone's field of vision for the first time. The blade was covered with dense cloud patterns and engraved with 2 small words Chenying. The Chenying sword and Su Buling's Zayadan are both famous swords. They were made by famous masters in the spring and autumn period and have been collected by the Daqi treasury. Dayo also searched for them when he broke into Chang'an, but he did not expect to appear again on such an occasion. Bite. There was a slight crisp sound. Situ Huiyu ran like a tiger, slashing through the sky with the big sword in his hand. He seemed to be moving forward indomitably, but at the moment when the swords met, they were slightly misaligned. When he got the advantage, he locked the blade with the copper ring on the back. As long as he applied a little force, the sword would break the next moment. The scene of the sword cutting off the head. Zhou Yi's expression was indifferent. His sword failed and he was locked. He twisted the edge of the sword and with the power of the sword, he cut off the copper ring and caused a bloody gash on Situ Huiyu's shoulder. Ah! Situ Huiyu's muscles were towering, and he ignored the sword blade that stabbed his shoulder. The blade still moved forward, in a posture of exchanging injuries for his life. The people watching around did not even dare to look away. Zhang Xiang held the handle of the knife tightly, and even Eunuch Jia narrowed his eyes slightly, analyzing how to break the move. S.A. Blood spattered from Situ Huiyu's tense shoulder muscles, and the blade came to Zhou Yi's chest. Zhou Yi obviously didn't want to change his life. He raised his left hand and thrust his fingers through the copper ring on the back of the knife. The blade that was close at hand stopped a foot in front of his chest. Situ Huiyu took this opportunity and hit Zhou Yi with a headbutt. At the same time, he flipped the blade and tried to break Zhou Yi's fingers. As long as Zhou Yi was struck by this powerful headbutt and failed to pull back his fingers in time, he would definitely be severed by the back of the knife. Compared with the small injury on his arm, Situ Huiyu obviously took a big advantage. When the knowledgeable martial artist saw this scene, his eyes suddenly showed excitement. He was about to open his mouth to cheer, but he froze on the spot the next second. Bang! I saw Situ Huiyu hit Zhou Yi on the forehead with a powerful and heavy headbutt. Zhou Yi, who was unable to block the 9-ring knife, did not even move. But after Situ Huiyu bumped his head, his body shook a few times and he looked at the other person in disbelief. The stagnation cannot last more than a moment. A sneer appeared at the corner of Zhou Yi's mouth, his eyes suddenly became fierce, and he hit Situ Huiyu's forehead with a headbutt from his backhand. Bang! This time it worked. The tall Situ Huiyu felt as if he had been hit by a battering ram. He staggered back a few steps, his eyes were bloodshot, and 2 drops of blood rolled out of his nose in an instant. Tap tap tap. The whole place was silent. They watched Situ Huiyu retreat 4 or 5 steps away. He was obviously stunned. He staggered a few steps and fell to the ground. He bounced up very quickly and stabbed the ground with his knife before he could stand upright. All the princes and generals in the audience were astonished, and you could hear the needle drop in front of the Tai Chi hall. Snap! The teacup in Songji's hand fell to the ground and rolled around a few times. With gloomy eyes, he leaned on the dragon chair. Anyone with a discerning eye knows that although they haven't lost yet, the winner has already been decided. Yang Chang'an, a million warriors, the strongest young man, exchanged a head hammer with him, but he didn't move at all. He couldn't even stand here. How could he fight? The Queen Mother clutched her skirt tightly, her eyes full of anger. You are so tall, why can't you stand still? It's really. Chen Xian, the envoy of the Northern Qi dynasty, showed a bit of contempt in his eyes. He turned his head to look at the silent official of the Ministry of Rites, raised his hand and toasted with a glass of wine, showing his arrogance. Are you still fighting? Zhou clamped the long sword in the sleeve cannon of his elbow, wiped off the traces of blood on it, and looked up to the opposite side. Sidu Hui's nose was bleeding profusely and his eyes were red. He wiped the blood with his sleeve, snorted lightly, and still raised the knife. Dayo is now the only one left. You can die here, but you can't end up as a loser. The Tang family could not afford to disgrace this man, but the Sidu family could not afford to disgrace him. Below the Taiji Hall, Sidu Yueming, the Jia Empress and other secret guards were hiding in the dark. They sighed quietly. Sidu Yueming's face was gloomy and he remained silent. Ah! Sidu Hui's face turned red, and he jumped up high with the sword in an almost violent manner. He completely gave up the opportunity to defend himself and change his moves. He exchanged his life for his life and used force against force. This move was surprisingly fast, and the nine-ring knife in his hand seemed to change. It was as light as the wind, and there was not even a sound of the copper ring clanging. Zhou's eyes narrowed slightly, knowing that Sidu Hui was ready to fight, and there was no slightest contempt in his eyes. In an instant, he moved to the side of Sidu Hui, and the ghostly edge of his sword stabbed straight into the left neck. The sword moved lightly and swiftly. Originally, the heavy nine-ring sword could not guard against this attack, but Sidu Hui twisted himself in the air and dragged the sword like the wind. The blade actually struck Zhou's shoulder from behind. The blade was as fast as thunder, and no one could understand how it was struck. There was a bit of astonishment in Zhou's eyes. He couldn't trade his life with the madman, so he could only stab instead of pick. He supported the blade of the sword with his left hand and pushed the nine-ring knife away along the shoulder against the blade. Cha! Sparks flew everywhere. The nine-ring knife rubbed the blade and slashed down diagonally, landing on the white jade brick. The ground suddenly exploded, creating a groove of more than 2 inches. Zhou was also shocked by the huge force and took 2 steps back. Sidu Hui didn't hesitate at all after the blade fell. He turned over again with the inertia of the blade, and struck down with the nine-ring knife again. 28-way serial knife, good guy. Zhang Xiang's eyes suddenly lit up. He saw the Sidu family's special skills for the first time, and he couldn't help but look a little surprised. Eunuch Jiao frowned slightly and said softly, the Sidu family's serial knives are coming in an endless supply step by step. Each sword is heavier than the last. It is said that 28 swords can open a mountain, but no one in the world can resist Sidu Yuejin's 9 swords. I don't know Sidu either. How many knives can Hu make? The thousands of people watching in the square seemed to have stopped breathing, staring intently at the 2 figures who could not be seen clearly in the field. Ah! Dang dang dang! As the blade whirled, Sidu Hui's whole body was like a wheel, holding a heavy blade and hitting the white jade bricks continuously. The splashing of stones was unstoppable. If he were in a battle formation, more than 100 people might be close. Not safe. Zhou had no chance to parry. As long as he didn't dodge the knife, he would basically be dismembered and forced to retreat continuously. Finally, after Sidu Huiyu struck out 13 times in a row, the blade suddenly came. Most of the people in the audience stood up and stared at the two voices in the square, but what they saw made everyone feel cold from head to toe. Zhou was forced to resist by the spinning blade. With no choice, a golden rope suddenly sprang out from his sleeve. There was a weighted iron bead on the top of the rope. When he threw it out, he was hit by the 9-ring knife. Swish! The golden rope was similar to a meteor rope and was not cut by the blade. It quickly circled the 9-ring knife several times under the action of inertia. Zhou took advantage of the situation and yanked his left hand, stopping the spinning blade abruptly. After forcing the blade away with the blade, he kicked Sidu Huiyu from the side with a side kick, hitting him in the chest. Boom! The force of this kick is obviously not small, and the crisp sound of broken bones can be clearly heard. Sidu Huiyu let go of his big sword and was kicked out like a rag. He fell to the ground a few feet away and rolled a few times before he stopped. He put his hands on the ground and tried to get up, but his mouth was full of blood. Difficulty getting up. The entire Tai Chi palace fell silent, and everyone was in a daze, completely unaware of the current situation. Being hummed 3 times by a kid with a yellow mouth from Mobei, and now he can't even touch the corner of his clothes, so he just lies down like this. Manchao Wenwu's breathing was stagnant, staring at the figure lying on the ground, as if he was still waiting for something. Daiyuo, lost. Maybe not yet. Sidu Huiyu hadn't fainted yet. His mouth and nose were full of blood, and his ribs were half broken. He was still struggling to get up. After all, he carries the dignity of millions of warriors in the Central Plains on his shoulders. If he doesn't get up, his backbone will really be broken. Sidu Yueming clenched his fists tightly and remained silent. He could have asked the Holy One to stop the competition, but he did not. Swordsman, Sidu's family is full of swordsmen. The swordsman speaks with his sword, and he always wins or dies. Today, the men of his Sidu family cannot live with such shame. If they die here, they are swordsmen, but if they live, they are not. The people sitting here are all civil and military officials, princes and generals, but the people of the rivers and lakes are the people of the rivers and lakes, no matter where they stand. They are already despised by the literati and suppressed by the court, but at this time, it is not always the warriors who stand in the front. The literati can analyze the situation and follow the good master, and the warriors have only one word of righteousness in their hearts: brotherhood is righteousness, and national righteousness is also righteousness. With the national humiliation in front of us, how can a man of 7 feet have the face to live in the world if he cannot win? The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 190. Boom. A cold rain fell quietly, and the sky was filled with thunder and lightning. Sidu Huiyu supported the ground with all his strength, stood up unsteadily, got into a boxing stance, and hooked his hand. Zhou was also a Jianghu person, so he understood the thoughts of Jianghu people. He stuck the knife on the ground and stepped forward with the sword in hand. It is difficult to face the world until death, so it is also polite to send people off on their way in an upright manner. Zhang Xiang closed his eyes, feeling a little unbearable, but had nothing to say. They all use knives. In this case, how can Feudy be worthy of the knife in his hand? Clang. At this moment, a gong sound suddenly sounded from in front of Tai Chi Hall. The blade of Zhou's sword stopped at Sidu Huiyu's throat, and he turned his head to look at Tai Chi Hall. Songji's face didn't look good, but he didn't lose his royal bearing. He was silent for a moment and raised his hand. It's just a discussion. Young people still have a long way to go. There is no need to feel guilty about a temporary victory. Sidu Huiyu, please go down. The entire audience was silent. Countless generals fell down in their seats and slammed the table. As soon as the gong sounds, the winner is decided. Xiao Chuang rubbed his forehead and thought for a while, but couldn't say anything. After all, Tai Ying's deer hunt 10 years ago was indeed overkill and broke the backbone of Dayo Wuren. Even if one person from the Zhou family, Lu family, and other famous families was left in the capital, even if there were 2 more young people like Sidu Huiyu, he wouldn't have been beaten so badly. But the fact is a foregone conclusion, so what? Raindrops fell heavily on the eaves of Taiji Palace and the imperial umbrella below. Songji tapped his fingers on the chair quilt and turned his head to look at the many young people below the side hall. Is there anyone else who wants to come forward and compete with Zoyze? No one responded. Under the side hall, more than 100 leaders of the younger generation in Chang'an City lowered their heads and remained silent. Whoever goes up at this time will be embarrassed. Even Sidu Huiyu can't beat him, so what's the use of them going up? If you stay here, you won't be punished. If you go up there, you will be scolded by the common people for the rest of your life starting tomorrow. Who made them lose their lives? All the civil and military officials in the audience turned their attention to His Highness, and many familiar people even spoke to urge him, but no one moved for a long time. Zoyze seemed a little impatient, standing in the heavy rain and spreading his hands. I don't even dare to engage in will battles. 100 people can tire me to death. Or you can go together. Dayo had no soldiers, no iron, no food, but he was able to rise up in a small place and compete in the world. Is it possible that 3 generations after that, only mediocre people will be left? If that's the case, this golden plaque that is the best in the world seems to have little weight. As soon as these words came out, the crowd was instantly angry, but they were all speechless. Such is the case with defeat. You have to endure even if you indulge in all kinds of disobedience. To this day, Northern Qi is still called the lost dog. Now, what if it is beaten to the ground by the opponent and scolded as mediocre? Come on. The courtiers nearby angrily scolded the nephews who were hiding in the crowd. Behind the bead curtain, the Queen Mother stood up with a pale face, and scolded in the direction of the young people gathered in Chang'an City. What are you still doing? There are millions of warriors in Chang'an City, and not even one can fight? Why are you practicing martial arts if you are greedy for life and afraid of death? Could it be that in the future, the enemy's soldiers will invade Chang'an with strong horses, and you guys with swords will give up when you see that they can't beat you? Knife surrender. Everyone was speechless. Songji waited for a long time, looking like he was hoping someone would stand up for himself, but in the end he just shook his head, raised his hand and said, "That's all, woo-woo-er." Wow. As soon as the words left his mouth, they were suppressed by a burst of noise. Songji frowned slightly when his words were interrupted, and turned his head to look, only to see a tall figure wearing a white prince's robe, standing up from the Queen Mother's throne and walking into the rain. Step, step. Liu Yun's boots stepped on the rain-soaked white jade stone steps, causing splashes of water. His calm but clear voice gradually overcame the noise in the imperial city. The national prestige of Dayo was established by my Su family. It was so in the past, it is now, and it will be in the future. Whether it's a river or a lake, or a family, from the desert in the north to the seaside in the south, the imperial court can't kill my Su family, let's kill it, and the imperial court can't destroy my Su family, let's destroy it. As long as there is one member of my Su family alive in the world, a knife will be hung over your heads, a knife that will destroy the country and destroy the species. This sentence was given to everyone in the world by my grandfather before his death. Only a few decades had passed, and a bereaved dog who had retreated 3,000 miles north dared to say bluntly in front of the emperor of Dayo, the capital of Dayo, that I, Dayo, were all mediocre people. Have you ever asked me if the Su family would agree? The voice was calm, but like thunder, it resounded through the rain outside the Tai Chi hall. The whole audience was shocked. Xiao Chuang, Lu Chenggan, Lu Pingyang, Zhang Xiang, Eunuch Xia. That's why the three princes, 9 ministers, princes, generals, and even Songji on the dragon throne all remembered that there was such an unknown warrior in the stands for the past year. Retreat 3,000 miles north. The reason why men in the northern Qi dynasty still don't tie their hair. At that time, Su Lai ruled the world and drove Daki, who was like the sun in the sky, out of the central plains to Mobei. This is the national humiliation of northern Qi. Su Lai's regret in his life was that he did not really help the Song family to unify the whole world. Knowing that there was no hope of advancing northward, he wrote this sentence with some regret before his death. As long as there is one member of my Su family alive in the world, a knife will be hung over your heads, a knife that will destroy the country and destroy the species. However, few people believe this sentence now. When Su Lai was alive, he did have the ability to scare the monarchs of the three kingdoms with one sentence, but death is death. There is only one Su Lai in the world, and this knife is not very sharp at present. Especially now, with the only seedling of the Su family who is poisoned and suffering from injuries, what can he do except shouting in vain? But no one here dared to say this. The Su family is the Su family. Even if Su Lai has been dead for decades, the world still belongs to Su Jiaping. If you want to question this statement, you must first weigh your own weight. All the princes and ministers in the audience were silent. Although they felt it was a bit inappropriate, it was not unreasonable to carry Su Lai out at this time to suppress Baiki's arrogance. The Queen Mother stood up from behind the bead curtain and was stunned for a moment. It was not until she saw Su Buling walking down the steps that she said urgently, "Su Buletinling, why are you so crazy? Come back quickly." Songji, who was sitting on the dragon chair, was a little stunned. He seemed to be recalling the past. When he heard the Queen Mother's voice, he sighed, raised his hand and said, "No, go back. You have the dragon lock goo in your body. If you force yourself to move, you will die or be disabled. There is no need to force yourself out of the battle for this." Su Buletinling stood in the heavy rain and looked at the young disciple under the side palace, Nanyo, who did not dare to step forward, with cold and arrogant eyes. "With the prestige of the country, I, the son of the Su family, why should I die? You don't want the face, I want it. You can afford to disgrace this man, but I can't afford to disgrace him." The civil and military officials were all stunned, some were angry, some were defensive, some were annoyed, some were awed, but they were all silent. The Su family is qualified to say this. But would you allow a cripple who was born with cold poison to say this at a time like this and be prepared to risk his life? Regardless of whether you use force to lock the dragon goo, as long as you really do it, you will basically not be able to stand up after this fight. The imperial medical master who can force his life is a useless person. If he dies. The Queen Mother became anxious and said angrily, "Su Buletinling, don't be stubborn, come back to me." Tai Wei Lu Pinjiang's expression changed, and he hurriedly raised his hand and said, "Your Majesty, please quickly dissuade the Crown Prince Su. If the Crown Prince makes a mistake." Songji's expression was calm, and he thought for a moment, "I am ashamed of Prince Su and Princess Su. I can't let you make any mistakes again. Go back." Su Buling seemed as if he hadn't heard anything. He walked to the weapons rack, took out a spear, and waited a little. He is upright and does not do what he is told. As long as the Holy One sets an example and takes the lead in setting an example, even if he does not give an order, my Su family will repay him with loyalty. Even if my father is here at this time, he will not stop him. The whole audience was silent. If the Su family was still the same Su family before Jiazi, this would indeed be the case, but everyone turned their attention to Songji. Songji lightly pressed his fingers on the armrest of the dragon chair and remained silent for a long time without speaking. Eunuch Jio picked up the gong hammer and came to the gong. Su Buling picked up the buqiang and walked to the center of the square. There was a commotion in front of the Tai Chi Palace, and everyone's eyes were filled with disbelief. Su Buletinling, this is true? The Queen Mother ran out from behind the beaded curtain, stamping her feet in a hurry, but was held helplessly by the palace maid. Lu Pinjiang's expression changed a lot, and he was still communicating with the Holy Master to figure out how to stop Su Buling from committing suicide. Lu Yunlin, who was standing behind Zhang Xiang and others, quietly disappeared into the crowd and trotted towards the outside of the imperial city. Thunderbolt! A bolt of lightning flashed across the sky, awakening the princes, generals, and ministers who were all occupied with their own thoughts, and their eyes returned to the front of the Tai Chi hall. Su Buling held a black rifle in one hand and pointed the finger diagonally at the ground. The raindrops slid down from the 2.5-foot bloodletting trough and fell to the ground, causing splashes of water. In the rainy sky, under the gaze of thousands of people, Su Buling walked in front of Zhou, his eyes slightly unruly. Do you need me to identify myself? With a slightly playful smile, Zhou held up the black sheath long sword and tilted his head slightly. See Prince Su, back then, the Su family killed hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians of northern Qi. This blood feud has not been avenged to this day. The sword has no eyes. At this time, martial virtue does not seem to be very important. Su Buling's voice was tepid. You fought 3 people in a row, and I was injured. It's fair. If you can take my head, you are very capable. Oh. Zhou nodded. Although his expression was slightly frivolous, his eyes were extremely serious. A dying tiger is stronger than an ordinary cat or dog. It is taboo to underestimate the enemy, but it is not a mistake he would make. Clang! A gong sounded, and thunder echoed through Chang'an at the same time. The whole place fell silent, and the sword lights lit up at the same time.